Hey, welcome in, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight on DomTime, an issue I've been meaning to talk about for quite a while, and I had to get the right array of guests, and we have them tonight to talk about it. A judge in New York ruled that stop and frisk essentially was unconstitutional. The New York City version of it, the model for the nation in a lot of ways, if you're going to do stop, question, and frisk. And the judge cited Philadelphia, of all places, as more of the template, as more of the model to use around stop, question, and frisk when you're looking for illegal weapons, when you're looking for contraband, when you're looking for any number of things. Joining us to talk about this is Jonathan Goldstein, who's a firearms attorney out of Montgomery County, one of our go-to people here on DomTime and on the radio show, and a new face, Rick DeMichele, who is a twofer, a criminal defense attorney and a municipal prosecutor here in South Jersey. Yes. I've never interviewed somebody doing both jobs at once, so that'll be a first. Jonathan, I see in the pre-interview you said you believe stop and frisk is horrifying. Stop and frisk in New York has resulted in the Dinkins years from a high, and I think you even have it in some of your notes, of over 2,000 homicides a year to around 400 in the Giuliani/Bloomberg years. Viewers should know, though, that the New York race is hot over this, and the leading candidate, it's true, de Blasio, is an outright staunch opponent of this, and he's getting traction.
Yeah, I mean, so the question is whether it's effective, but also whether it's constitutionally offensive, right? So it would be very effective if we were to house a police officer in each person's home to observe them as they committed crimes in process, but that's constitutionally offensive. And the question of whether, and most of the federal cases that have looked at this, whether the poor, whether racial minorities are entitled to go about their daily lives without running the risk of being stopped and questioned and having their effects gone through by a police officer, whether that's actually constitutionally sound is, I think, a very important one. I don't think it is. I think
but that's not, isn't that a mischaracterization of what the program is? It's stop, question, frisk.
Well, it's stop, don't let me leave, question, and frisk. And fundamentally, the Fourth Amendment, which stops us from being subjected to unwarranted search and seizures, right?
Asking you a question?
I don't want to talk to you, police officer. Am I free to go? I don't want to stay here and talk to you. I'm on my way. I'm on my way to meet my girlfriend, my worker.
Well, let me ask Rick here, what would you say about that? Do the police have a right to stop someone under any and ask them a question or two? What are they doing here?
I think what these cases come down on is whether they have a reasonable suspicion. I think that that's been very clear. And so the case that you're talking about in New York and these other cases kind of turn on, did the police have a reasonable suspicion, articulable suspicion that a crime was being committed here? Did they have a reason to stop them, ask them?
Does it have to be a crime? Or is it that based upon their police instincts and the totality of things, that there may be a crime about ready to commit it, or they don't like the looks of it? For example, they see a guy padding constantly. It's a hot day, and the guy has a hoodie on walking down the street. Should police be able to ask them a question or two about that, to size that up?
If they have a reasonable suspicion that that person, given the weather, it's a totality of all the facts and the circumstance. Right. If they believe based on the weather, based on everybody else is in shorts and a tank top, and here comes a guy in a trench coat or a bulky hoodie, and he's constantly adjusting his chest because and that gives the officer to have a reasonable, and he may be in an area where there's known drug dealing or known other issues. That may be enough for a reasonable suspicion to stop and frisk. But it's a question of what was in the officer's mind at the time they made the stop to ask the stop and frisk, the stop, ask, and frisk part of this. So really each one individually it turns on its own. I think what's happened in New York is that you have a protocol, and it's almost like a menu of things, and that's where I think you can get into a little bit of trouble because it almost formulates when it's appropriate, when it's not, and I think it's really it has to be based on a case-by-case basis.
Wouldn't you like to see a protocol, though, Jonathan? Isn't that a better way to do it? For a couple of reasons. One, then the cop is not somebody who's racially profiling or doing whatever. Two, if you feel the techniques are wrong, we have it codified, we have it down, and we can duke it out prior to some cop coming up with some nebulous comment that we can't check on.
Yeah, so here in Philadelphia, the police are under a consent order or some other kind of court management where David Rudofsky, who's a very good lawyer and a professor at Penn, where I went to law school, has a team of people that go through data about these stops and says, who are you stopping and why? Are you stopping black people way out of proportion to their representation?
So what if you were?
If you were, it's constitutionally offensive. It's constitutionally
but
offensive.
is it offensive if we see out of proportion to the numbers in Philadelphia? When Mayor Nutter said, when all this went down, I think it was 80% of the people that are committing the crimes, murders, are African American, and 75% of those that are being killed are African American.
Well, then you're probably, if you're looking for people either who are shooting victims or shooting perpetrators, you're probably going to stop a lot of African Americans.
Right.
Right. The question is whether you're only stopping African Americans. The question is whether 9 out of every 10 of them is an African American. The question is, when you stop African Americans, do you stop them and detain them for a half hour, toss their backpack, toss their car, ask for permission to go into their house, which is right up from the curb, and toss that? Whereas when you stop white people, you maybe ask them a couple questions and let them go. So the particulars of this, as my colleague said, really matter.
All right, Rick, your comment on that?
I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think what you said is, are you being pulled over because you're black? Are you being stopped because you're black? Because if the officer is of the opinion that, well, since 75% of the people, if that's the statistic, that commit these crimes are black, I'm going to pull over black people and stop them because I'm looking for a murderer or somebody who's
Well, let me give you another scenario. Let's change this up a little bit. I'll start with you, Rick, and it's one a listener brought me. We have a bunch of kids, and I don't know why they picked Front and Girard. I think it was Front and Girard, Front and Cumberland. It's midnight on a Friday night, a bunch of them in a car, driving around, seeming aimlessly, and pull over and stop them. Hey, what are you doing here at that time? They're white.
Right. My answer, if I'm in that car, is, am I free to go? Or are you detaining me?
Yeah,
Is that legit?
Absolutely. The question then becomes, are they being detained or not? But
Right.
let's be honest. If the area is known for drug ban, for contraband, to gather children, I mean, it may even be if they're young kids who are looking to race cars illegally or drag race. I mean, if they have a number of arrests that are made in that area, a number of convictions, and they know that's an area for that, it may not be all that unreasonable to, if you see a bunch of kids in a car at that time of night, they're not there buying ice cream, right?
Yeah.
At that time
I mean,
of
they're
the night.
The problem
in a
is,
minority neighborhood.
Identify for me a corner in the city of Philadelphia that's not a known drug location, right? It becomes pretextual to a certain point. You can
There's
find
thousands of them.
Yeah, but you can find a reason to stop people and talk to them, and without a bright line that says, look, people have a right to travel on their way, do their business, unencumbered by a conversation.
And you
with
know how
police.
much I love bringing to the show, but I got to say, you're out there in Montgomery County. I'm in Germantown.
Right.
We got 2,000 murders in New York prior to doing this. Now we have 400. Doesn't that push back a little bit against what you're, as a purist, sure, but isn't that real world concerning to you?
There's two sides to the coin. The people that live in those poor neighborhoods or in downtrodden neighborhoods or neighborhoods that are filled with violence,
Right.
they have a right to live there free of violence, but they also have a right to live there free of constant police harassment. And there's two sides to that coin. Yes, we want to stop people, and so we can therefore take guns off the streets, stop bad guys and put
Right.
them in jail, get people who have warrants and take them off the streets. But by the same token, a guy who happens to fit the profile of, random drug dealer who's a 26-year-old African American who may be on his way to or from church or work, who's never been arrested before in his life, he has a right to walk down the sidewalk without having to talk to the police 4 times every 3 weeks.
All right, we agree on that, but hold that thought, Rick. More coming up with Rick and Jonathan as we break down the tension here, and there's a lot specifically. Stop and Frisk continues on DomTime.